Good morning, class 6 students. Today we are going to study the same chapter, History, chapter 2, part 2. It's first portion we have seen in the last class. And now we are going to see the second part of the same chapter, chapter 2. And today we are going to start from the topic, a changing environment. How changes happened in the environment and what changes happened in the lifestyle of the peoples. So we have already studied that early people lived in caves and they used to move from one place to another place. This topic onwards, we are going to study that people started to settle permanently in one place itself. What helped them to think of settling down in one place itself? Let us see that. See, a changing environment. Around 12,000 years ago onwards, climate of the world totally changed. Relatively warm climate developed. When warm climate developed, naturally grasslands also developed. So when the climate of the world changed, all over the world, grasslands also developed. So when grasslands developed, naturally number of animals which survive in grasslands also increased, like deer, goat, sheep, cattle, antelope, like that. So around 12,000 years ago, climate of the world changed, relatively warm conditions. Warm climate developed. This led to the development of grasslands. This in turn increased the number of animals like deer, cattle, goat, sheep, antelope, like that. And the people who hunted these animals now started to follow them, knowing their food habits and breeding seasons. People started to follow them. People wanted to tame these animals, and people wanted to follow these animals because when grasslands developed, animals moved towards grasslands. So in order to hunt these animals, people wanted to move after these animals, and people knew their food habits and breeding seasons. And of course, people start to think of rearing them and herding them. People not only followed these animals, and this was a period, people started to think of protecting these animals, herding these animals, and rearing these animals also. This is what we can say, a change happened all over the world, a changing environment. Around 12,000 years ago, climate of the world started to change, relatively warm conditions, warm climate started to develop. This led to the development of grasslands. When the grasslands are increased, grassland areas are increased, the number of animals which depend these grasslands also increased, like deer, antelope, cattle, goat, sheep, like that. So people who earlier hunted these animals now started to follow them. Wherever these animals moved, after these animals, people also started to move by knowing their food habits and breeding seasons. And also people started to think of rearing these animals and herding these animals. Fishing also became very important during this period. People started to fish also. Now let us study how people become farmers and herders. The beginning of farming and herding. And in this topic, let's study how people become farmers and herders. We know that this was a period when different types of grains grown naturally in different parts of the subcontinent, like wheat, barley, rice, such types of grains. So it was a period, it was a time when different types of grains naturally grown in different parts of subcontinent. These grains were mainly wheat, barley and rice. And men, women and children, they collected these grains for food, and also they knew where these grains are grown. When people saw these grains, they started to think, why can't they grow these plants by themselves? So people start to think how to grow plants by themselves. When they saw these grains, they got idea how to grow plants by themselves. So people started to grow plants by themselves. This is how people become farmers. People change as farmers. When people start to think of themselves how to grow plants, they become farmers. So naturally, rice, wheat, barley, such types of grains grown in different parts of subcontinent. People collected them for their food, and also they knew where they are grown. When they saw where these grasses are grown, they got idea how to grow plants by themselves. When they started to grow plants by themselves, they become farmers. Now let's see how they become herders. It was also the time of taming animals. People also start to tame animals by providing food, by providing them food. The first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of dog. The first animal to be tamed was the dog. Not only people tamed dog, people allowed some other gentle animals like pig, cattle, sheep, goat, such gentle animals to come near their camps. These animals used to come in herds near their camps. People also allowed them to come near the tents, and people protected them. So sometimes people protected them from wild animals like tiger, lion, like that. So this is when people started to protect some of the gentle animals. They become herders. So people become farmers and people become herders. The first animal to be tamed was the dog, and later people allowed some gentle animals to come near their camp, and people started to protect them. So when people started to give them protection, and when people started to use them for their purposes, like for getting skin, meat, and also for doing some types of works, people become herders. This is how people become farmers and herders. Now see the topic domestication. This is the name given to the process in which people started to grow plants and looking after animals. So domestication is the name given to the process in which people start to grow and looking after animals. The process of looking after animals and process of growing plants. That process is called domestication. Very often, the animals and plants tended by the people become different from wild animals and plants. So domestication is the process in which people start to grow plants and looking after animals. Domestication is the process of growing plants and looking after animals. So very often the plants and animals which are tended by people become different from wild animals and plants. This is because people selected some plants and animals for domestication. Not all the plants and not all the animals domesticated. Only some plants and some animals people selected for domestication. Example, people selected those plants, animals that are not prone to disease. The case of plants, let's see which type of plants mainly they selected. Plants, especially large grain size, grain bearing plants they selected for domestication, and also strong stacks plants also they selected because the stacks should have the capacity to hold the weight of the grain. That's why they selected mainly which type of plants? Large size grain bearing plants with strong stacks, and also plants not prone to disease. This type of grain plants only they selected for domestication. And animals, mainly gentle animals they selected for domestication, and also animals not prone to disease. Gentle animals and animals not prone to disease. So in this way, when people started domestication, the plants and animals which are domesticated become different from wild animals and wild plants. This example, the teeth and horns of wild animals become larger and stronger than domestic animals. So what is domestication? The process of growing plants and looking after animals can be called as domestication. Not all the plants and all animals selected for domestication. Only few plants and animals selected for domestication. And also we know that only gentle animals and large size grain bearing plants they selected for domestication. And later these both animals, both animals and plants which they selected for domestication become different from wild animals and plants. A new way of life. We know that when we grow a plant, for the perfect growth of the plant, it may take some days, sometimes some weeks, some months, or sometimes some years. So when people started to grow grain bearing plants, we know that for looking after these plants, people wanted to stay permanently in one place itself. If they moved from one place to another place immediately after planting, or if immediately after sowing the seeds, if people moved from one place to another place, they would not be able to look after their plants. And so, for looking after the plants, people started to settle permanently in one place itself. So in this topic, a new way of life, we are going to study how people started to think of settling in one place itself. That is, how people started to live permanently in one place itself. What was the reason for that? When people started to grow grain-bearing plants in one place, people also started to stay there itself. For what are the purposes? For looking after the plants, for watering, for weeding, for driving away animals and birds. After that, when the plants are ripened, when the grains are ripened, they need to collect these grains. Not only collected, after collection of the grains, they need to use this grain as their food and also as seed. All the grains at a time they would not be able to finish. They need to keep it for future use also. That's why they need to collect grain. After the collection, they need to store these grains. Because the same grain again they need to use as seeds. And that's why they need to store. Storing mainly they used some earthen pots, or they build baskets, or they dug pits on the ground and they store these grains in all these areas. This is a new way of life people started. That means people start to live permanently in one place itself. That is called actually new way of life. The reason behind that, people wanted to look after the plants which they have grown. And for that, they need to settle permanently in one place itself. If they moved from one place to another place, they would not be able to come in time to look after their plants. And so, everything would be eaten by animals and birds. And so, they would not be able to get anything for future use. So, they start to live permanently in one place itself. Storing animals. People used animal as their store of food. We know that mainly people get lots of items from domestic animals When people started to domesticate animals, they used to get milk, meat, skin, and of course they used these animals for various purposes. So that is why domestic animals were called store of food. This process is called storing animals. When people kept animals for food like meat, milk, and of course for skin. This is called the store of food, process of store of food. Now let's see finding out about the first farmers and herders. Look at the map 2. Here you can see number of blue squares. These blue squares are the sites from where archaeologists have been trying to find out evidences of early farmers and herders. So archaeologists have found evidences of early people, their settlements from almost all over the subcontinent. Mainly northwest of India, in Kashmir region, eastern portion and south. From all these directions, archaeologists have found evidences of or signs of early farmers and herders. And to know whether these sites were settlements of early farmers or herders, scientists study evidence of grains and animals, plants and animals. So the most important thing they found from these sites, burnt grains. These grains might have burnt for a particular purpose, otherwise naturally burnt. So here people burnt animals. So these burnt grains shows the evidence that people lived in such areas. And also scientists found some of the bones of animals. So from all these sites, scientists and archaeologists they found evidence of plants and animals, especially bones, animal bones, to prove that these were the settlement areas of early farmers and herders. Now let us see the topic towards a settled life. Here in this topic we are going to see that evidences of people, whether they led a settled life or not. Archaeologists have found traces of huts or houses at various sites. Let us see one example. Burzaha. See the map and look at where this Burzaha. It is in Kashmir. In Burzaha, archaeologists found pit houses. These houses made on the ground with steps leading to them. These houses gave early people shelter during cold season. And also along with these pit houses, archaeologists have been found cooking here, evidences of cooking hearths, both inside and outside of the huts. This suggests that people could cook food both indoor and outdoor depending on the weather. And archaeologists found some stone tools during this period, and these tools were different from Paleolithic tools, and that's why these tools were called Neolithic tools. Sharp edged tools like mortars were there, sharp edged tools were there, stone tools were there. Also, archaeologists found some earthen pots. People used earthen pots mainly for two purposes: for storing things and also for cooking food like grains, rice, wheat, barley, such kinds of grains. And some cloths also they used to weave, because they used to grow cotton plant, and from cotton they used to weave cloth also for covering their body. So these all suggests that people led a settled life. From all these evidences, archaeologists could prove that early people, that is from 12,000 years ago onwards, people started to live a settled life, because all these evidences shows that. In Burzaha, especially in Kashmir, evidence of pit house can be seen, and this pit house with steps leading to it, and also earthen hearths also archaeologists found. This also suggests that people led a settled life. Now let us say about living and dying in Mehergarh. Mehergarh is located in a fertile plain near Boran Pass. This Boran Pass was one of the important route to Iran. Here, this is one of the places where people learn to grow plants and rear animals like sheep, goat, cattle, etc. This Mehergarh is one of the earliest villages of this region. And from this region, many animal bones were found. This also proved that people lived in this village and they led a settled life in this village of Mehergarh. And from Mehergarh, the remains of square and rectangular houses found. In all these houses, mainly 4 or more compartments were there. Some of the compartments were mainly used for storing things. And here in this village, when people die, their relatives and friends used to give them a respect, pay a respect to them. And people believed in the life after death. And that's why when along with the dead person, when the dead person buried under the soil, along with the dead person, animals also buried like goats, sheep, like that. By believing that in their another world of life, they need to have food. For that, along with the dead person, in the burial place, animals also buried. This is about Mehergarh. Mehergarh is located near the Bolan Pass. And here, living conditions of the people and also beliefs of the people, how people lived here. It is a portion. And 2 other portions elsewhere, Neolithic site and conditions of France. The 2 sections you have to read. So we have completed chapter 2, history. All of you read the chapter very thoroughly and answer to the questions which I have given as extra questions also.